investment is large.
Best thing I can do is just mention a few.
Perhaps there'll be a wake-up.
To hear more about our...
We highlight the three key challenges of the economy and place infrastructure and the need for infrastructure.
Infrastructure, obviously covers a huge range of areas, and just to mention, I think, as Bill mentioned at the start, some of the things which we've been very involved with, which was not just, although it was also about ensuring that companies in Scotland had access to public sector contracts and work during a very difficult time for the economy. More specifically, it was for people to get employment at a time when it was difficult in the economy, to make sure that public infrastructure works tend by their nature to be labour intensive, so it provided people with jobs whereby they were receiving wages, paying taxes rather than receiving benefits. And you'll just have to take it from me, the number of positive remarks I've had from within the industry and elsewhere about the difference between Scotland's approach and the rest of the UK over that crucial time. It's now changed, of course. The volume of work is now picked up substantially south of the border as well, but it was crucial at that time, and that was one of the purposes. But perhaps the most underlying purpose, the most profound purpose for it was, going back to a quote from Patrick McLaughlin, who's currently the Secretary of State for Transport. He came to Scotland a couple of years ago, and he said in all his wisdom that the problem in Scotland with the transport infrastructure is it hadn't been invested in for decades. Now, he was a Transport Minister back in 1989. He obviously forgot that when he made that statement, but he was right. There has not been the investment in Scotland's transport and other infrastructure, not at the level required, for decades. And that is something else that we're trying to address. So, for example, making sure that all Scotland's cities are connected by either dual carriageway or motorway. That's a fairly essential, basic standard which most modern economies would expect to have as of right. We don't have that. And in fact, Bill was talking before about the M8. The M8 is not even yet motorway all the way between Edinburgh and Glasgow. Well, it will be shortly. And of course, when we complete both the A9 dualling, which is underway now, and the A96 dualling between Aberdeen and Inverness, we will have all of Scotland's cities connected by either dual carriageway or motorway. And that's a fundamental thing. And it's not just because it's a nice thing to have. The benefits for the economy are substantial. Scotland has had a profound problem with productivity for many years. The UK has also a problem with productivity as compared to, say, Germany or other European partners, certainly with Japan and the US. And one way you can start to address that is to improve your infrastructure, so the economic potential of the country itself is thereby increased. So having those faster networks, and if you're somebody that lives or works in Aberdeen, you will know how much the 50-year-long campaign to have the Aberdeen Western Peripheral route completed means to that particular economy. We anticipate a benefit of around £6 billion, and that's apart from the reduced heart and stress levels that you'll have in Aberdeen and the surrounding area. So those are the reasons, I think, the fundamental reasons why we have to invest in infrastructure. It takes many forms. Of course, the biggest infrastructure project potentially on the horizon is the high-speed rail project, which we've had a very hard time convincing the UK government over a number of years now, going right back to 2007, that it was vitally important that Scotland was part of that. Very strong campaigns across Civic Scotland, trade unions, business organisations, to make sure that comes to Scotland. We've just for the first time got the agreement of the UK government to work towards that. Now, what they've said is they've accepted the fact that we have to have a sub-3-hour journey time from Edinburgh, Glasgow to London. Now, the importance of that is because you cannot achieve that without an element of high-speed rail. So to my mind, that's been very important in getting the UK government to sign up to that particular commitment, where before there was none. In fact, we were not even allowed to talk to High Speed 2, the company involved in taking this forward. That's now changed. And that will be transformative, I think, for the Scottish economy. And people often forget it's not about trying to access wealth and services and goods in London. Edinburgh and Glasgow, the central belt of Scotland, is the second most economically active part of the entire UK. This provides huge benefits for all the points between London and the central belt of Scotland. And of course, the benefits will flow to the rest of Scotland as well. That's why investment in rail is crucial. If you look at the experience of people in the borders after we've completed the Borders Railway, right along the Borders line, you'll see businesses which are saying they've seen a substantial upturn. You'll see people also saying they feel connected in a way they've never, it's perhaps stating the obvious, but it's hard to understand the extent to which you can feel isolated if you're not on the rail network. And it's been hugely beneficial. Now, in terms of a business case, very hard to make business cases for railways. It's the most expensive form of infrastructure that we do, but that's provided a major benefit to that part of Scotland. So we'll continue to invest in rail. We've got some substantial plans for that. As we mentioned already, electrification between Edinburgh to Glasgow, coming down to 30 plus minutes to get between the two cities. Once electrification has finally worked its way through with the new trains coming in and the substantially larger trains as well, real benefits, again, to the economy. It's about economic productivity in relation to that. And of course, what we want to try and achieve is electrification of all the lines in Scotland, first of all between all the cities, which in itself is pretty substantial. And people say to me, well, look, how is it the case that it can take you longer now to get from Edinburgh or Glasgow to Inverness than it did 100 years ago? Well, again, the simple fact is because the railway infrastructure was not invested in during the course of that time. British Rail used to have, I think, an 8% rate of return they had to provide to the Treasury before they could invest in any new infrastructure. We all know the lack of investment that happened there. So these things are long-standing issues. There's a long way to go to make sure that we start to bring our infrastructure in all its forms up to the standard that's required. And that's before talking about things like schools, which I know Andrew's going to mention, hospitals, housing as well. There's a huge amount to do. There's a huge backlog to catch up with. If I can finish off with one other aspect of infrastructure which is not mentioned nearly as much, which is broadband. I mean, especially in rural areas. You know, I was for 5 years, I think it was 4.5 years, the Minister for Transport. And most frequently you were dealing with new railway lines or new roads, demands of local people, quite rightly, for this infrastructure. The biggest highway they need now is a digital one, especially if you live in a rural area. It's quite possible to work from home, to have your own business at home if you've got the right digital connection. You can also access health, education, all sorts of employment opportunities if you have that connection. And that's why you'll see a substantial push in relation to digital infrastructure, absolutely crucial for a modern economy. And the one last thing I will say is that in relation to the infrastructure that we do have, we've just seen over another tough winter the effect of flooding on some of our infrastructure. Now, there were some very obvious things at Ballater and elsewhere as well, but amongst all that, people didn't notice so much. There was 1 or 2 fire stations which were made inaccessible due to flooding. And my view is, and obviously the First Minister in about half an hour will be announcing what my party's manifesto is going to say, but one crucial part of the next government has to be a long-standing, a very high-level look at all our infrastructure, how it's made more resilient. I mean, you all have heard of instances of why did they build a hospital or a school or these houses here when it's obviously built on a floodplain? Well, the Dutch build it on a floodplain, but they build it in a different way to make sure it can be resilient to water. So whether it's our railways, and we saw what happened at Lamington and elsewhere, whether it's our housing, whether it's our hospitals and our vital emergency services like fire stations, we have to have a different look at how we make sure this infrastructure, especially the critical infrastructure, and it's pretty critical if you've got a fire that the fire engines can get in and out of the fire station or people can get to the hospital. We've got to make sure that we build our infrastructure in such a way that it lasts a bit longer than your average school in Edinburgh, I would suggest, but we'll hear more about that shortly. It lasts and it services people and their needs at a time when things are absolutely critical. And to do all these things, of course, we have to have finance, and I make no apology whatsoever for saying we should be much more aggressive in accessing finance. You know, a lot of discussion about the Chinese deal and so on. There was no discussion about the fact they put £2 billion into Port Talbot, or that they're involved. Well, there was some discussion about their involvement, potential involvement in terms of nuclear power station. But whether it's Chinese or other, and there's a huge amount of money out there just now to be accessed. It's got to access it on the right terms and the right way. We have to see more infrastructure investment coming into Scotland. And given the constraints on public sector funds, that's never going to be enough to access it straightforwardly through public sector funds. So we have to make sure we attract as much investment across the whole range of infrastructure, public and private, as we can. And I think we'll remain committed to achieving that, because you can see there's a pretty long list of infrastructure things that we want to do. And I'll leave it at that.
Investment is largely.
The best thing I can do is just mention a few.
Perhaps there'll be a wake-up.
Hear more about our.
We highlight the 3 key challenges of the economy and place infrastructure and the need for it.